Alright guys, we're going to be doing a wheel bearing today on a Jeep Liberty. So, tools you're going to need are jack and jack stands. Strongly recommend getting an electric impact, air impact, something like that. Otherwise, you can use a breaker bar. You need some brake clean, penetrating fluid, and a wire brush. WD-40, it's alright. Definitely going to need a big hammer. Like I said, a breaker bar. You're going to want some drivetrain grease or wheel bearing grease. Definitely a torque wrench. It does up to 100 foot-pounds. C-clamp to compress your brake caliper. You're going to need a 21 and a 19 millimeter socket. And then you're going to need a big 1 3/8" socket for the axle nut. Now to bust that loose, you can use your breaker bar. That's where the impact comes in handy. Then you're going to need a special E14 socket. Looks like that. It looks like it Torx. Couple extensions and then an adapter. And some basic hand tools such as a 12mm socket for the brake calipers. So pretty straightforward. Possibly a torch, but today we did not need that. So these are the tools you're going to need. Let's jump right into it. We're going to be replacing our wheel hub on the driver's side. So at this point, I've gone ahead and lifted it up. Got on a jack stand, ripped the wheel off. Lug nuts are 19mm. And then the axle nut is going to be 1 3/8". Now I'd recommend getting an impact for that bad boy because that's really on there tight. We do have a lot of corrosion and some damage to the threads. We're gonna hope everything's okay. So at this point, I am going to spray down with some WD-40 since that's all we got. Start ripping our brakes off, and then we can start attacking the actual hub bolts from behind. But gonna rip some brakes off, give us a little more room, and let this WD-40 start doing its thing. So let's get into it. Alright guys, so these are going to be some 12mm here for the caliper itself, and then the caliper bracket are going to be 21mm. And this is a good time to throw a C-clamp across the caliper and compress it so it's easier to reassemble. Swing that off to the side. I'll make sure not to dangle it by the brake line. Move our brand new pads. You want to make sure you don't lose these little metal tab brackets there for the pads to sit in. Go ahead, rip these two 21s off the back, and we can remove our entire rotor and bracket. So we went ahead, we got our brakes off. I did spray everything down, and we're going to try and do this without busting apart any ball joints. So at this point, we take our axle nut and we thread it on until it's almost flush. We want it in just a little bit so the end of the axle is sticking out. And then you want to get a giant hammer. Then you want to beat the end of this, and you want to make sure that you're able to move this axle freely from the actual hub here so your splines are not seized. This may take a lot of persuasion, hence a big hammer. So penetrating fluid, maybe some heat would be recommended, but hit it a bunch of times and eventually it should come loose, and you want to make sure you don't miss and hit one of these studs or else you're going to have a bad time. So went ahead and did that off camera. And then we went ahead and started ripping out these hub bolts here. These are what's going to be holding your actual wheel bearing assembly in. Now these are a special head. They're going to be this inverted Torx looking bit, and they're going to be specifically an E14. So we have some room with our axle now that it's not seized. We can wiggle it back. Stick this on the back. You want to make sure that this sits on nice and flush, as these are super easy to strip out, and then you're in a world of trouble. So make sure it's on there nice and tight. Get an extension on the back, and I had to use a breaker bar to bust them loose. And then at that point they came out pretty nice actually, so I'm kind of curious if this was replaced at one point. We are replacing it because it was in an accident. We're getting some noise, so we're going to try and replace the wheel bearing. So we have one left. Sprayed it down. If these do fight you, you may have to use some heat. And then usually this is seized into the spindle or knuckle real good. And that's probably where I'll have to bring out the torch. So far, everything's going pretty nice. So we just have the one left on the bottom left, and then we can see if we can bust this loose. Alright guys, so it has been a bit of time. This one really fought me. Did not want to come out, but you can see it's on its way out. So once we get these 3 bolts, there's no longer anything holding this in other than rust and friction. So I spray a lot of penetrating fluid in there and up here on this seam. Now usually you do have a backing plate here, I believe. This one no longer has a backing plate. Rip. So, big hammer. And you want to hit it right about here, I believe, is where the backing plate is open. If you don't have a backing plate, super easy. Can also just fold it over to give you some swinging room here. And you do want to hit on opposite sides, so a couple bangs here, a couple bangs there. Once you have this seam opened up, it's pretty easy. Just spray some penetrating fluid in there. You can use chisels and all that, but honestly, once you have it moving, hard part's over. So continue smacking this till we get this off, and we can prepare for the new one. So at the point of removing the hub from the actual knuckle here, you can see why it's important. You want to make sure that the axle is moving freely from the hub, that's the word, before you get this unbolted, or else your entire axle is going to want to pop out of the diff. That's why I recommend doing it this way. There are about 1,000 different ways you can do this though. So at this point, not many Jeeps are crusty like this. This one pretty much looks like it's the Titanic at this point. So grab yourself a wire brush, some brake clean. You want to make sure that this mating surface is absolutely spotless or close. And then it's not a bad idea to clean up all the gunge in here as well. And you want to make sure that your splines and threads are nice and clean here on your axle. You might as well give this a little bit of kiss too. Get this cleaned up, and then we're ready to start greasing up your axle and throwing the new hub in. So hard part is definitely over. Alright guys, so you want to make sure that your new bearing and hub look exactly the same as your old one. And you can see obviously that one's pretty gross. This one spins super freely, so other than the incredible amount of rust, this one is so far a lot smoother. So now to prepare it, we have cleaned it up, cleaned up the main surfaces, made sure everything's happy. You want to make sure that the bolts thread into here, bolt pattern's the same, length, everything else is happy and the same. So next step would be to grab yourself some wheel bearing grease or drivetrain grease, anything good quality. And we're going to want to lather up the splines and a little bit of the threads on your axle. And you're going to want to pack it a little bit in here on the splines here. This doesn't have to be too much. Again, this just to prevent seizing. You don't want this to be frozen the next time if you ever have to pull this apart. So go ahead and grease this up. Again, you want to make sure everything's nice and clean here. There is an inner little lip here. I'm going to go over with a screwdriver and chisel a little more of the scale out. Then we should be good. We'll slide our new bearing in. We'll start all 3 bolts. We won't tighten them down. We'll get them started. Then we're going to give it a bit of taps with a hammer here, make sure it's going in nice and square. Get it centered, and then we can start torquing this down. And you want them to look a little bit like that. You can throw a bit on the threads here too. We do have damaged threads, so this will help the nut chew through that like a champ. Go ahead, grease up the hub a bit, and we can start slamming her in. Turns out that's a two-handed job, but goes in pretty easy. Alright, so we threw a little bit of grease on there just to help that bolt get started since they're nice and crusty. And then I use that one to suck it up so there is a bit of a gap. Then I can get the other 2 lined up before we tighten her up. Then we're ready to start torquing these down. Then we'll be good to go. Alright guys, so we just finished snugging everything up. Now on the hub here where it sits inside the knuckle, you can put a little bit of grease or anti-seize. There we go. And then at this point, geez, everything is snugged up. I did put the axle nut on with the good old torque wrench impact. So this, I believe, is 100 foot-pounds, and these should get torqued to 96, I believe. I believe it's 76 to 96, and again, you do want to be careful. These do like to strip out. And then once you're at this point, you can throw all your brakes back on. If you're going to do new brakes, make sure you clean off the oil. Not a bad idea to do that with this surface here. They do come pre-oiled. And then at that point, throw everything back together the way that it came apart. Pump your brakes before you go for your test drive, since we have compressed our caliper. Take it easy for the first couple hundred kilometers. Make sure you retorque your wheels. That's pretty much it. So, I'm gonna finish slamming this together, go for our test drive, and see if we fixed our issue. All right, guys, so we just got back from our test drive. It sounds perfect, finally. Finally! This thing's been a nugget for quite a while, and it's been making quite a few noises. So now we got it home, it's time to redo the rest of this poor thing, but that's how you do a wheel bearing on a 2002 to 07 Jeep Liberty. I'm unfamiliar with the Liberties, but that's how you do a wheel bearing on a Jeep Liberty. This generation specifically should say somewhere here, but hope this helps. Hope this helps you guys out. That's it for today. If you like what you saw, like, subscribe. If you have any questions, comment below. I'll try to help you guys out. So, thanks for watching. Take care.